North of Kabul, where the Somali Plain meets the rising teeth of the Hindu Kush, there is a stretch of concrete that shaped a generation of history. Bagram Air Base, Bagram Airfield, BAF. For some, it was a lifeline. For others, a symbol. For everyone who passed through, it was a place they would never forget. Bagram's story did not begin with America. In the 1950s, as Afghanistan courted outside assistance, engineers carved a runway north of Kabul with Soviet support. It was part of a modernization drive, roads, tunnels, airfields, meant to connect a mountainous nation to the wider world. In 1979, when the Soviet army invaded, Bagram transformed from an airstrip into the beating heart of a war. Transports landed day and night. Fighters roared over the Panjshir. The airfield grew longer, harder, more fortified. When the Soviets withdrew in 1989, they left behind a base remade by conflict. The 1990s brought ruin. Civil war shattered what remained. Hangars became husks. Concrete cracked. For a time, the runway was a prize and a battleground, an emblem of a country at war with itself. Then the world turned. After September 2001, Bagram, broken and pitted, was reborn. U.S. and coalition forces seized the field. Engineers patched craters and cleared mines. Tents went up, and with them a tempo that would define the next 2 decades. Airlift in, Medevac out, special operations threading valleys. The runway was the artery, the operations floor the brain. Growth followed mission. A second runway, longer and stronger, arrived by the mid-2000s, giving the base the flexibility to land the largest transports while fighters quick-turned and helicopters kept to their own patterns. 2 runways meant fewer bottlenecks and more options in a place where minutes mattered. Bagram evolved into a city, hardened shelters and hangars, fuel farms and motor pools, barracks and blast walls. It was not simply a base, it was an ecosystem. Inside the Joint Operations Center, headsets and call signs stitched together a vast theater. Weather and air tasking orders, Medevac launches tracked in real time, imagery feeds and radio traffic living side by side. Even off-duty, people learned the base by sound. The angry purr of an A-10, the deep rumble of a C-17, the thump of rotors you felt in your chest. Just yards from the runway stood a lifeline of a different kind. Craig Joint Theater Hospital, one of the busiest trauma centers of the war. 5 minutes could be the difference between life and death. Surgical teams trained to make decisions in 60 seconds. Some nights they caught helicopters with blood-warm urgency and sent stabilized patients on to Germany. Others, they treated civilians and allies whose stories were heavy and complicated. The hospital's rhythm was the war's human heartbeat. Between missions, Bagram felt like a small city under floodlights. Rows of containerized housing units with plywood porches, coffee before sunrise, a chapel's quiet bench, a gym's metallic chorus, a bazaar where Afghan vendors sold rugs and radios and repairs. For tens of thousands, Bagram was work, routine, and waiting, an endless loop of preparation, execution, and recovery. On the flight line, each aircraft spoke its own language. F-16s, F-15s, and A-10s brought close air support, each with a doctrine honed by terrain and mission. C-130s short-hauled, C-17s shouldered massive loads, and tankers orbited to keep the sky alive. Black Hawks ferried the wounded and the weary. Chinooks carried entire squads and their burdens. Apache brooded at the margins, ready to escort. Pilots memorized wind patterns and density altitudes the way others memorize street names. In the tower, controllers ran a ballet of aluminum under mountain winds that could slide a jet or stall a heavy helicopter at the worst moment. Beyond the lights, the perimeter fought its own war. HESCO baskets and T-walls, watchtowers and sensors, patrols on predictable rotations made unpredictable by intent. Rockets and mortars probed weaknesses. In 2007, a suicide bomber detonated near the gate while the U.S. vice president visited inside, a jarring reminder that even a fortress has seams. In 2016, another suicide attack struck inside the perimeter. The threat ebbed and surged with the war, but it never vanished. Bagram's story carries darker chapters. Early in the war, a detention site at the airfield drew scrutiny after abuses were documented, including the deaths of 2 Afghan detainees in 2002. The United States instituted reforms, built a new facility nearby, the detention facility in Parwan, and over time transferred operations to Afghan control. For many who served and many Afghans, these events became a painful point of reflection. It matters to say plainly that wrongs happened. It also matters to record how procedures changed, oversight increased, and missions transitioned. Accountability and accuracy belong in the same sentence. Supplying a mountain war meant more than planes. It meant roads and seasons. From ports in Pakistan to the Salang Pass, and through the tunnel the Soviets had carved decades earlier, convoys hauled fuel, food, and spare parts to Bagram's gates. On some days, the most strategic asset in Afghanistan was not a jet, but a snowplow clearing a clogged pass so a convoy could move. The surge years brought an army of arrivals. Bagram swelled with aircraft, sorties, advisors, and hopes pinned to a runway. Counterinsurgency demanded presence and patience. Intelligence fusion sharpened. Advisors traveled to district centers and returned at night, carrying stories of progress and setbacks that never fit neatly into slides. Afghan aviation grew alongside. Pilots trained on C-27s and Mi-17s, learning to make the sky their own. A base contractor could spend a morning fixing air conditioners and an afternoon installing fiber lines, reminding everyone that war at scale is logistics at scale. Night changed the palette. Blue floodlights across black tarmac, white breath plume in sub-zero air, a Medevac's red cross flashing in the snow. Somewhere, laughter carried from a USO show, a small act of morale work that did more than people realized. In quiet rooms, a chaplain wrote letters and listened. In living quarters, someone checked the calendar and counted the days. As missions evolved and troop numbers fell after 2014, Bagram slimmed down. The runway still thrummed, but at a lower pitch. Train and assist replaced some combat sorties. Departments consolidated, and sections were fenced off or handed over. The base grew leaner without becoming idle. In 2021, drawdown turned to departure. Plans shifted. Debates sharpened. One question echoed. Should the United States keep Bagram open through the final act or consolidate in Kabul? Holding Bagram would have required thousands more troops to defend and sustain it, and to duplicate airport functions farther from the embassy and the city's population center. Consolidating at Kabul lowered the footprint, but put extraordinary pressure on a single runway. In the early hours of July 2nd, U.S. forces left Bagram. Generators stopped. Floodlights went dark. For the first time in 2 decades of American war, the runway fell silent. Afghan forces woke to quiet and scrambled to assume control. Weeks later, as the Afghan government collapsed, the Taliban entered Bagram. The detention facility's doors were opened and prisoners fled, including members of the Islamic State's Khorasan branch. The consequences would reach Kabul's airport in the chaotic days to come, intensifying an already perilous evacuation. The decision to evacuate from Kabul rather than Bagram will be studied for years. 2 runways at Bagram may have allowed a different footprint and more standoff, but holding it would have meant longer and riskier road movements between Kabul and the base, and a far larger force to sustain both ends. Strategy under pressure is rarely clean. Logistics under fire is never easy. In the end, Kabul's Hamid Karzai International Airport bore the weight of the evacuation, with all the strain and tragedy the choice entailed. After the last flights, the concrete remained, but the page had turned. Rumors swirled about who would control the base, what it would become, and whether foreign powers would seek a foothold. Without the world's largest coalition behind it, Bagram became what it always was at its core, an airfield in a valley, waiting on the choices of those who hold it. Bagram's legacy resists a simple verdict. For Afghans, workers, soldiers, families, the base was paycheck and peril, modernity and intrusion. For coalition troops, it was purpose and fatigue, camaraderie and compromise. For politicians, it was a lever. For some, it was a prison. For many, it was a hospital. It was all of it at once. Listen to the people who passed through. A former airlift pilot recalled, "We landed with pallets stacked to the ceiling, water, rations, ammunition, and rolled patients back out. Dust in the filters, a mountain crosswind, and always the sense that the mission wasn't waiting on anyone." A trauma surgeon remembered, "We trained to make decisions in 60 seconds. What's bleeding? What can we fix? What must wait? Civilians, soldiers, allies, every story different, everyone heavy. A controller in the tower said, "Hot days stole lift, cold nights slid a jet. We managed traffic, weather, altitude, and nerves. Bagram didn't forgive inattention." An Afghan pilot explained, "We wanted the sky to be ours, to fly for our families and our country. Bagram was a school, a test, and a hope." A base contractor put it plainly, "People forget the electricians and the cooks. War is logistics. Bagram was a small planet of it." A chaplain reflected, "We were the pause button. Grief, hope, homesickness, they all landed here." A security forces airman remembers, "Be predictable in your discipline, unpredictable in your routes." A truck convoy commander summed up the ground truth, "You'd feel the war long before the runway came into view." There are other voices. A human rights researcher said, "It matters to say plainly that wrongs happened. It also matters to document reforms and handovers. Accountability and accuracy belong in the same sentence." A former soldier reflected, "We wanted to be the good in the story. When we weren't, it's on us to face it. The good work doesn't erase the harm. Both are true." An Afghan interpreter remembered being caught between worlds. Bagram was a job, yes, but also a bridge. When it ended, many of us were left between two worlds. A nurse spoke of a sound she could never forget. "There's a rhythm a helicopter makes when it's carrying someone who might not make it. You hear it long before it lands." Beyond the wire, life persisted. Shops opened at dawn. Children walked to school. Farmers measured seasons by snowmelt and harvest. The base sat like a second sun, sometimes warming, sometimes burning, always there. A shopkeeper near the gate remembered, "We sold more tea, more radios, more everything, also more fear." The road to the base was good for business and bad for sleep. Strategy met terrain. The runway tempted decision makers to believe air power could solve problems that belonged to politics, culture, and legitimacy. A policy analyst put it this way, "Technology achieved much. It could not decide legitimacy. That belongs to people, not runways." In classrooms and briefings long after the last flight, veterans were asked what they would change. One said, "Invest earlier in institutions beyond security, courts, schools, jobs." A runway can deliver tools, it can't build legitimacy. Another said, "Keep the detention system under relentless oversight from day one. We paid dearly for early failures, in trust most of all." A third said, "Listen more. To locals, to junior troops, to the people who live with our decisions after we fly home." Not all of Bagram's power lay in steel and fuel. Sometimes it lay in small things. A comedian on a plywood stage making a tired crowd laugh. A soccer game on a dusty patch of ground. A letter home read under a dim light. In those moments, the base felt less like a machine and more like a community. In the end, a runway is a promise. That something will arrive and something will depart. For 20 years, Bagram kept that promise, sometimes with grace, sometimes at great cost. The concrete will outlast the news cycle, but so will the stories. The people who built it, fought from it, healed within it, worked beside it, and lived in its shadow carry those stories. That, more than any metric, is the legacy that matters. To understand a war, follow the logistics, follow the hospitals, follow the choices people made when the options were all imperfect. Follow the runway. Bagram Air Base was never just a place. It was a crossroads where distant decisions met Afghan ground. It was a stage where courage and error shared the same billing. It was ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and sometimes the other way around. The jets have gone quiet. The stories have not.